Hi everyone, it's Neve here and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at the Jane Davenport style of art journal, and I'm creating a rainbow mermaid using some washi tape. So I'm working my Dina Wakley art journal on the cotton rag, and I've primed it with watercolour primer because the cotton rag doesn't necessarily take a great amount of wet media on it. I've sprayed the page with some water, and I'm using the blue-green colours from the Jane Davenport Brights palette to splash into the background and let it move and blend in with each other. And just spraying over the top with some water just to continue the moving. And I'm dropping in some of the Jane Davenport Incredible inks in some of the blue-green colours, and I've got a product list at the end of this video. Dabbing off some of the areas with some paper towel, and then I sprayed some gold colour shine over the top from Heidi Swap. I love that colour shine. It's a beautiful gold. Be aware though, sometimes it can stay a little bit tacky on some pages. With this page, however, it's sort of blended in, but on top of acrylic paint, while it stands up really well, it does tend to stay a little bit sticky. So once I've created my sea, I want to create a sunset. So on my watercolour palette, I dropped out some of the Incredible inks again in Lemon, Sorbet, Fresh OJ and Frida, using some water and spraying some water over the top to blend those colours together. And I like using the Incredible inks because they act like a liquid watercolour. You can mix them more easily. While I absolutely adore the Brights palette, I'm more used to using ink. So I just feel a little bit more comfortable using the inks and doing that. So I'm using some of the Dina Wakley tissue paper to trace over a mermaid shape that I drew onto some watercolour. Please excuse my head while I'm bending over to trace it out. The reason I'm using the collage paper is that I want to stick this onto my watercolour page, and I want to do some acrylic paints over the top of it. Now if I did acrylic paints on top of my watercolour, the acrylic paints would reactivate it and let the watercolours bleed up through the surface, and particularly with the inks as well. I wanted to avoid that, or at least give it some sort of barrier, which is the reason why I'm doing this onto tissue paper. I'm drawing over the top of my image with the Epic pen, which is a carbon-based ink, which is waterproof. It's a very fine nib as well, so you get very fine sketchy lines, which means I can paint over them. I can readjust lines with not too much hassle and not worry about it, but it gives me enough darkness that I can kind of see through the paint as well and know where my lines have been. Now this page was done for a challenge on the Jane Davenport mixed media page on Facebook, and it was to draw a mermaid and to use some washi tape on it in some way. I've got a huge big pile of washi tape which I don't use very often, so it's a really good challenge for me to actually get into my stash. The washi tapes that I'm using are from the Jane Davenport palettes collection. It's just a rainbow of basically watercolour samplers, which are beautiful, and I'm really glad I used them the way I did. So just putting them over the tail as well, and this is going to form my scales in the end. You can see my beautiful working page that everything goes onto. Just as a side tip, I've got a few of these pages, and with the amounts of inks and backgrounds that are on them, I've actually started scanning them and using them in my collages because they're absolutely beautiful, and I can't take myself to tear them up and use them in their entirety. So I'm painting over the back with collage matte medium to stick it down on the page. The reason for that is it makes it translucent, so you can go over the top. And now I'm going in with the light portrait set of Jane's acrylic paints. I think this one's called Highlight, over the top of my tissue paper, and you can see that the watercolour isn't bleeding up through the surface, so I'm getting that true colour from the acrylic paint. And every mermaid needs pink hair apparently, but I really like how it pops from the page, particularly from the blue-greens in the background. So just putting in a sort of base colour, because I know I'm going to add more to this. I'm putting in her cheeks and her lips, adding some of the different shades. Basically I was just trying to use up the paint that was on my palette, blending it all together. I'm a big believer in not cleaning my paintbrush and just blending with the same paintbrush. I'm using the fine tip white Sharpie, which I've only just purchased and I love. It's really, really opaque. It goes over almost everything. The other thing that I'm doing is painting in the shape of the cleavage on the washi tape. Now, washi tape has a kind of plasticky coating. Water-based things like watercolour or mermaid markers or inks won't tend to go over it, but permanent paint pens, acrylic paints and so on will paint over it quite well. The pencil I just used was graphite pencil, a water-soluble graphite pencil. I think it's a 6B. It goes on very light, but when you activate it with water it actually becomes quite dark, so it's great for shading in and going around images. And the good thing about it is if you don't have an eraser, which I tend to always lose, you just put a bit of water over the top of it and you can blot it off to get rid of the pencil, which is very, very handy. So I'm using a piece of netting for my collage because I didn't have any stencils kind of like mermaid scales, and stamping over the top with a blending tool and black permanent ink. And then with a very loose pen I'm going over the top of the hair with the Jane Davenport paint over pens. You can see I'm holding the pen halfway up the barrel, so a much looser hold than if I was trying to write with it. I'm just basically scribbling over, trying to get that sort of loose effect. When I finished that, while I was doing this, particularly with the scales and the mermaid, I had the picture book, the rainbow fish, going through my head with beautiful scales on it. Now if I had a silver paint pen I would have put in a silver scale to represent the book, but I had the blue and the yellow was the closest I came to doing that. I actually really like this effect of not drawing all the scales in but just doing a few of them, or a few in different clumps. It just sort of gave you that pattern and it allowed the washi tape in the background to come out through as well. So with the background I wanted to put in some bubbles, a bit more texture into my watercolour background. So I'm using a wet wipe with a stencil, and because it's damp it reactivates the watercolour and it can remove it. So it's a technique you sometimes see with the acrylic paints called ghosting, and it works really, really well on watercolour as well. Here I'm using some of the Jane Davenport Mermaid markers to put a little bit more depth of colour in. They're very, very strong, very pigmented, which is fantastic, but I wanted, particularly with the blues, a little bit more muted, so I'm using a wet brush and just touching the tip to my mermaid marker instead of using straight mermaid marker onto the surface. I decided I wanted to do something in the sky, but the stencil I was going to use didn't work. It just didn't look right, so I decided to leave that. I'm going back in and putting more hair in, and once I put the white on I actually became really, really happy with the hair. It's a much finer tip, and I think the difference with this is using the different line widths added so much body to it. So you've got the solid background, the thin strands in the foreground and the middle ground with the painted colours. I've also really loosely scribbled around the tail and the mermaid's body, and again having that really loose hand doing those outlines helps to look to the more deliberate sketched look. So I looked up a quote on Pinterest, just put in mermaid quotes, and it was, "My demons tried to drown me, but they didn't know I could breathe underwater." Because I wasn't happy with the spacing, I decided to change the grammar of it somewhat, and then the teacher came out and me, it's like, no, you need to correct that because that's just not right. I went over with my Epic pen to change it, put in my Sharpie pen. It didn't quite work. Went over it with the watercolours again, then it bled because the Epic pen was still a little bit damp. Basically, I thought, I've got this beautiful mermaid at the front and I've just stuffed it up by doing my quote and not happy with it. I was already feeling a bit funny about it because I wasn't happy with my handwriting to begin with. So the more I tried to play with it and fix it, the more it didn't work. So I decided to go in with the rainbow washi tape that I had, because there are some in those sunset colours with the yellow and the pinks and purples, and I was fairly happy with it. It kind of reminded me of a brick wall, but I thought it's abstract enough that I could get away with it. Sort of added in, it tied in the tail of the mermaid as well. So once I put the washi on, I decided to rewrite my quote correctly this time over the top. So again, using that Epic pen with a thin nib, and previously I think you saw I put some of the black back into the hair as well. So this is my final page, going in, just finishing off, doing the finishing touches, adding a little bit more depth in with the lines, making caterpillar eyebrows, which I went back and fixed up, and just putting in some more shading using the purple paint marker. Good thing about these paint over pens is while they're still wet, you can just move them a little bit with your finger. So this is my final page for the Mermaid giveaway challenge on the Jane Davenport mixed media page on Facebook. I really enjoyed doing this page. I really am pleased that I challenged myself to hand draw it all, and I can see the improvement from the beginning of the year when I started to draw. So it really is true that practice makes perfect. I hope you enjoyed this page. Here are the materials that I used to make it, and if you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel and make sure you click the little bell, and that will let you know when any more videos come up in the future. Thanks for watching.